There is a fundamental misunderstanding about what it means to be kosher. My name is Gloria Kobrin of kosherbygloria.com. I'm a cook who happens to keep kosher. I'd like to believe that I make food so delicious, it's sinful. When you keep kosher, you can't break the rules, but you can find a way to make the rules taste better. Some of the misconceptions about being kosher are that kosher food has to be very salty, has to be greasy, has to be heavy. It really is such a mistake, because being kosher doesn't mean you have to deprive yourself of any of the flavors of all the different foods of the world. You can do it all. And in fact, many of the cuisines around the world don't involve mixing dairy and meat, so it's not such a problem. Reading the recipes from many chefs, including Julia Childs and Jacques Pepin, and now Yotam Adelengi has amazing recipes, more Sephardic in nature. You can taste everything. When I was a child, I always hated Brussels sprouts, and now as an adult, I really love them. So we're going to be making Brussels sprouts with walnuts and dill. We start by cutting off the ends of the Brussels sprouts and peeling off the dark outer layers until we arrive at the parts of the Brussels sprouts that are brighter green. So I'm just peeling back these leaves, which you can wash up separately and make a Brussels sprout salad with a mustard vinaigrette or a plain vinaigrette. So here they are cut in half. I'm going to then put them into a bowl of salted water to soak for 15-20 minutes, so to get them as clean as possible. Next, we're going to bring a pot of water to a boil and put our beautiful green Brussels sprouts inside, where they will blanch and become even brighter. While that's going on, I'm going to pour some olive oil in this pan over here. Once our Brussels sprouts are ready, I remove them using a spider, which is much easier than emptying a heavy pot of water into a colander. Okay, so now we have the Brussels sprouts in the hot oil. I'm going to add a few turns of pepper. I'm not adding more salt because they were soaked in salted water to clean them, and I'm not a big salt user. So if you want to add more salt, that's to your taste. So there are the roasted walnuts. I toasted them in a 400-degree toaster oven for about 5 or 10 minutes in advance. And now I'm adding freshly cut dill, which is just delicious with the Brussels sprouts, and stirring it around. And at this point, it really takes no time. As you can eat Brussels sprouts raw, this smells absolutely amazing. Well, I'm going to turn the stove off now. And this vegetable, as are all the vegetables that I make for Thanksgiving, just as good room temperature as they are hot. Because nothing gets to be hot when you've got 25 people at the table. I grew up in a kosher home. So we were kosher, completely kosher, separate milk and dairy. We lined the countertops with brown paper for Passover, separate Passover dishes. But we did eat non-kosher food in restaurants outside the home. So we didn't eat what we like to call glatt treif. We didn't order pork chops or anything like that, but we did eat chicken and veal and all kinds of things outside of the home in restaurants. When I got married, I realized I was going to become more kosher, and that was a real problem for me. Food means a great deal to me, and it was a problem not being able to eat what I wanted to eat. People have told me that as you get older and you stay kosher longer, the cravings disappear. Not at all. They haven't disappeared for me one bit. So I have to just keep cooking. My mushroom ears are demanded at every gathering. Let's start by cutting up mushrooms and an onion. Okay. Onions in the Cuisinart. I'm going to put mushrooms in on top of this. I put the onions in on the bottom closer to the blade because they're harder to chop, and this way the blade has more direct contact with the onions and you'll get it so there are fewer larger pieces left when you're finished. I'm going to cut the mushroom in quarters and then add it to the rest of the mushrooms that I've already prepared and add this to. Okay, I've got onions on the bottom of the Cuisinart next to the blade, and then I've got the mushrooms on top of the onions, putting the top on the Cuisinart and locking it in, and then using the pulse button, Sometimes you have to take off the top and just spoon it around to get what's on top on the bottom, what's bottom on the top. Next, we're going to turn on the stove and melt a little margarine so we can saute our chopped mushrooms and onions. The hotter your flame is under mushrooms, the less liquid the mushrooms will actually exude. So it pays to keep your flame really hot and stir it around. Okay, our mushrooms are sauteed. There's very little liquid, so I don't have to worry about raising the heat anymore to get rid of it. I'm going to turn off the stove, and I'm going to add some thyme, which smells really good. It's dried thyme out of a bottle, but if you buy a fresh bottle of thyme, you'll get that smell. If you use an old bottle of thyme, you won't. So I recommend keeping your spices fresh. So we have some thyme and flour, and we have a little bit of lemon juice, gives it a little freshness, and just a couple of turns of freshly ground black pepper, and we stir it around. And despite the fact that it is hot, we're going to taste it because you just never know what the onion tastes like with the... Very good. Once that's ready, we'll need some defrosted non-dairy puff pastry. Sprinkle some flour on the counter, not too much, and begin rolling the pastry. We just want to thin it out a little and soften it to get a little bit bigger than it was. You're done with that. You take a bunch of this mushroom mixture that you've made, and you spread it out within about an inch around the margins. So you leave about an inch empty so that when they're cut, they don't ooze out all over the place. I think that should be more than enough. Let's see. Take the shorter side of the pastry and roll it 3 times toward the middle. Then do the same from the opposite side. Then wrap in wax paper. Then wrap the wax paper inside a heavy-duty sheet of aluminum foil to freeze. We freeze and then let the mushrooms defrost because the mushroom logs are too soft at this stage and need to be harder in order to be sliced easily. The sliced mushrooms and pastry are then placed on a cookie sheet lined with baking parchment and brushed with an egg glaze that's made with an egg beaten with a tablespoon of water before being put into the oven. I was born on Thanksgiving Day. My mother actually called her doctor and told her she was ready to give birth on Thanksgiving Day, so it was chosen for me. So maybe it's in my DNA. It's always been my favorite holiday, and it has no rules. There's no things that have to be done by a certain time, like on Shabbos or a holiday. It's just having a good time, and the only time constraints are when the children get tired. I like adding butternut squash to the Thanksgiving menu because it can be bought pre-cut, as opposed to having to peel and seed another vegetable. Preparation starts on the stove with sauteing some garlic and oil and then adding the cut squash to it. And that has to just be stirred around a little bit until, actually you start to smell it a little bit, and until not quite yet, yep, absolutely. The smell of the garlic is filling the air, and as the garlic starts to get a little bit softer. And when you've actually accomplished that, I'm taking this pre-cut squash, much easier than using a whole butternut squash, which you have to peel and then seed and then do all those things to it. They have these lovely containers of butternut squash that are pre-cut. And I actually discovered this week from Fairway that they have also kosher certification on them, so all the better. And we're going to stir the squash around so that all the oil and garlic hits it and it starts to brown. Squash is really quite hard, but every package of squash somehow has different consistencies, different hardness, so you sort of have to see what hardness yours has. Yeah, so if you can see this piece of squash, This is a little bit big. I must have missed it in my cutting. I usually take them and cut them a little bit smaller, but you don't want them too small because as they cook, they will cook too fast and they'll get too mushy. And the idea for this at the end of the day is for it to be sort of crisp tender. You want it to have a bite. It shouldn't taste like baby food. So I'm stirring this around until the squash actually turns brown. Once your squash is browned, transfer the pieces to a roasting pan. I'm now going to sprinkle it with a little bit of sea salt. I used to make this with regular salt and I used a little bit more. Sea salt is a little bit stronger. It gives more of a pop and it's sort of more fun to use. Larger flakes, and I've been enjoying it. Also just a few turns of black pepper. It does make a difference if you use freshly ground black pepper. It's a different consistency, a different feel to it, and it tastes better. So if you're doing fresh vegetables for Thanksgiving, don't ruin it with ordinary store-bought stuff. Okay, so now that the squash has been seasoned, I'm going to sprinkle it with panko, which is a Japanese breadcrumb. A lot of people say, oh, you don't need to use that. You can use just regular breadcrumbs. I don't happen to agree because the breadcrumbs here, the panko, is much coarser and crisper and just gives a much nicer crunch when it's all done in the end. So whatever brand you use, there are various brands of panko. I would use panko. Okay, all done. And this goes into preheated 325 degree oven. When the squash is crisp tender, take it out of the oven and toss it with minced parsley. Serve hot or at room temperature. I've taken several cooking classes over the years. I took a knife skills class, I took a cake decorating class, a vegetarian cooking class, over the last, I guess, 20 or 30 years. But most of my learning has come through sitting with Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking, or Jacques Pepin's La Technique, and just studying their style and the way they do things and learning through practice. I don't like to do anything in a precise way. I always like doing things my own way. It's just, I suppose, my oppositional, possibly, personality. So it's good to start following a recipe the way it's given. And then slowly but surely you add your own touch to it and that makes it yours. I don't see recipes as codes of law, not like the rules of kosher. They are there as a springboard for you to bring your own personality to. My family has always done stuffing differently. Let's start by cutting and chopping an onion, celery, and peppers whose core and seeds have been removed. Then we place them all in a bowl. Add oil to the skillet and heat over medium flame. And then I'm going to add all these vegetables. I've got chopped up peppers and celery and onions, and I only use red, yellow, and orange peppers because none of our family really likes green. So you can use green if you like them, but we don't. This recipe came to us from someone who used to work for my mother-in-law's family, my husband's family, a lady from the South who made the most amazing cornbread stuffing, and she taught me how to make it. So I don't actually know if she made her own cornbread or not. I do. And this year I added some roasted corn. I just took some frozen corn kernels and heated them up a little bit in some oil and roasted them before I added them to the cornbread batter. The recipe for that is on kosherbygloria.com. I let it sit out, I cut it up and I let it sit out on top of the stove for a day. I cut it up in chunks and let it sit on top of the stove so it can sort of dry out before I froze it for later use, which is actually now. Next, we season our vegetables. I season with Bell seasoning, which I've been using for years. It's a blend of, and I'm reading now, rosemary, oregano, sage, ginger, marjoram, thyme, and pepper. It's got no salt, it's got no MSG. So I'm going to season these vegetables with the Bell seasoning. Stir it around. You can, if you were here, you could smell as the heat hits the vegetables and the Bell seasoning. It really smells amazing. starts to smell like Thanksgiving. Okay, stir, stir, stir. All right, when it's sort of mixed up and all stirred, I'm now going to add the cornbread. So it's sort of chunked up. What the lady who taught me how to do this kept emphasizing was that this is a peasant food. This was just eaten not for fancy. So everything, the vegetables are cut up chunky and the cornbread is chunky. Nothing is an exact science, and that's sort of the part of the beauty of it. That it's very, very simple. You could buy your own cornbread, but I like making my own. So here it is. We stir it all up. And with anything that we're cooking, we have to taste it. So I'm going to try to grab a piece that's probably not too hot yet. Okay. Gonna add more. I usually add about a box, but everybody can season it according to their own taste. Describe myself. Okay, I think probably if I were to list a description about myself, I start off probably as a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a grandmother. In between, I've been a mediator, I've been an emergency medical technician, I've taught cooking, and I suppose the thing that goes through everything is that I've always cooked. So I've cooked as a child, I've cooked as a wife, I've cooked as a mother, I cook as a grandmother, and at the end of the day, that's what I do. I cook. Apple pie was always my father's favorite dessert, and it's also mine, so I make it every year for Thanksgiving. First, you need to have your pie plate lined with dough, plus dough for the top. While your refrigerated dough is coming to room temperature, you can cut up your apples. I learned how to cut actually from a lady named Anna Mae who worked for my family for 60 years and who died about 2 years ago. And as I used to watch her peel anything and she used to stop the knife on her hand, I remember saying to her, how do you do that? You're gonna slice your hand off. And she says, I don't know, but this is the way I always cut. So she's the one who taught me how to cut, and that is the same way I cut. So I know it's wrong, and I did take a knife skills class somewhere down the line, but I continue to cut the way Anna Mae did, and so far it's worked out fine for me. Occasionally I cut myself, but I think occasionally everybody cuts themselves, so I'm not gonna worry about it now. So here I go cutting with my hand as the stopper, but that's sort of the way it goes. These are Granny Smith apples. They are drier than other apples. They're tarter than other apples, so they keep their shape better than other apples. Once your apples are peeled, cored, sliced, and placed in a bowl, you add brown sugar and white sugar. Okay, and this is a mixture of nutmeg and mace and allspice and cinnamon that I'm also going to sprinkle over the apples. Then this is a lemon that I'm going to use a microplane, which is just an amazing device. Then we grate some lemon zest and add some lemon juice. And frankly, hands are one's best mixer, so I'm not even going to bother with spoons. I just mix it all up together. So I can separate the apples and be with my hands and make sure that everything is coated with the spices and with the sugar and the lemon zest, and it just smells unbelievably wonderful. So now I'm going to roll out the top of the pie crust and sprinkling flour over the counter. I'm going to coat it with a little bit of flour so that it's easier to roll. And then I'm going to coat the rolling pin as well with a little bit of flour to make it easier to roll this. And then we're just going to hope that this rolls out properly for me. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If you have a pastry scraper, you can lift it up and move it around much easier than trying to do it with your hands. Okay, this is my pie shell that I've already rolled out. I'm now going to use a slotted spoon and actually spoon the apples into it. You may say, why don't you just dump it all in? Because I like the liquid to be poured in at the top. Somehow the pie keeps its shape better, and I can more easily place where the apples are going. So I'm just using the spoon to get the apples all in, And then I'm going to pour all that liquid with the sugar and whatever, everything that's oozing from the apples on the very top instead of having it possibly go quickly to the bottom. And now I'm pouring all the juices that are left in the pan, I'm pouring over the pie, so nothing goes to waste. Next, we're going to lay our top crust onto the apples. Then I'm going to take a fork and I'm going to go around the outside of the pie shell and make little indentations to keep the top and the bottom of the pie shell together. There are many different ways that you can do this. You can fold the bottom pie shell over the top. You can squish them together and make like a ruffled effect. Just depends what mood you're in at the time and how quick you want to be about it. Okay. Once you've done that, you take a very sharp knife and you go around the outside edge and make 3 holes in the top so that steam can escape. Okay, I'm just taking a little bit of water. It's plain water, it's not even egg water, and with my hands, although many people would use a brush, but again, I think my hands are excellent utensils, and I'm just going all over the top of the pie crust with water just to seal it a little bit more. It doesn't even need an egg wash, it just needs a little bit of water, not too much, maybe a tablespoon or 2. And then I have a little bit of sugar that I'm just going to sprinkle over the top of the pie shell, which just gives it a very nice brown, extra brown look. Now your pie is ready to go into a preheated 400-degree oven for 45 to 50 minutes.